Hello everybody and welcome to a Watchful I Studio video. Today we're going to do a painting tutorial, which is basically going to be part 2 of painting some Chinese repeating crossbowmen. I would have done this as an entire video, but I actually put the video segments in different folders, lost one of the folders which showed all the highlighting and finishing up the miniature. And I just recently found it. So here we go, adding a second video. Hopefully you watched the first one. If you haven't, go right ahead and click on the link on the screen. I'll take you to the first video showing you how to get to these beginning stages of this video. So going over the paint list, we have pretty much the same colors we used from our last video. We're going to be adding in some additional colors. Make sure that we have all the highlights and everything that we need. First colors we're going to start with is we're going to start adding some highlights to our flesh. Flesh base is basically what we're going to start with. This was pretty much the color we used for the original skin tone. And now that we're after the wash, going to go back in and start building it back up. I use what's called a 3-step method, which is basically choosing 3 colors for a particular area, using one as a base, mid-tone, and a highlight. And essentially, I'm just building one on top of the other, covering less and less of the surface area as I get further towards my final highlight. So think of it like building a pyramid. You know, your base is going to be your largest part of the pyramid, and each block that goes on top is going to get smaller and smaller. And essentially, that's how we're painting. So we have a flesh base color for his skin, and we're going to be adding that first highlight. Now we're going to be taking flat flesh and basically doing the same approach. So we blocked out his skin, and now we're just going to be getting even a little bit smaller and leaving some of the original color behind, as well as obviously the brown wash that we used in part 1. Colors I use are pretty stark. They're pretty high contrast. One of the reasons why I do that is they typically photograph pretty well. They look good on the tabletop. Shows a lot of the details, which is something that I always appreciate, particularly with miniatures like this, where there's not a ton of accoutrements and, you know, backpacks, shovels and skulls and all sorts of adornments hanging off of him. You want to bring out the best that you can for what is actually on the miniature itself. And in most circumstances, you want to direct the eye towards the face of the miniature anyways. So I always like to have the highlights a little bit higher. As I'm touching this up, we're going to put one more final highlight on the skin, which in this case is going to be flesh highlight. You can see I'm using different Vallejo ranges. Overall, I like their paints. I love their bottles pretty much the most. Paint stays around forever. Now that we're done with the skin, you can see that step was pretty quick. Now we're going to move on to the tunic. We're going to go back in with our beige brown. And essentially, we're going to be applying the same technique that we did on the skin. So we're looking for all the raised areas. And we're going to be basically painting in those raised areas. And at this stage, you know, we want to leave some of the wash behind. But we want to make the lines thick enough so when we build up our next highlight, you know, we're going to see all the colors that we've utilized. One of the things that you'll see at the end of this video is I made the highlights a little bit more contrasty than maybe normal. And the main reason for that is I wanted to apply a nice Agrax Earthshade wash at the end of all these highlights, just to kind of blend and tone everything back down. Of course, depending on the style of paint job that you want, you can always apply all these, you know, 2, 3, 5 colors, whatever you choose for your highlights, build them up, and then wash down your miniature and tone everything down and kind of blend it in. And you can use multiple washes to achieve that. You can water down your washes and basically start getting into that whole concept of glazing, where you're building up layer upon layer upon layer of paint and gradually blending in those colors. I'm more of a tabletop painter. I want to get my stuff on the table pretty quickly. So my highlights are going to be a little bit stronger. And I also want to use as small of a palette as I can. And I prefer not doing a lot of mixing, but you'll see in this video that I actually do a little bit of mixing. We're pretty much done with that tunic. Getting ready to move on to the next stage, which is going to be a lighter highlight on the brown. And again, you want to try to leave some of that previous color showing to give you that concept of highlighting. I'm a big fan of highlighting the miniature from pretty much every angle. And there are a lot of techniques out there where painters much better than myself will teach you to, you know, pick a lighting source, pick an angle, and that's how you want to highlight and shade your miniature based on the angle of the lighting that you want to work with. A lot of painters will work from basically as if the sun was at 12 o'clock, which is basically, you know, directly on top of or above the head of the miniature. That's where a lot of your zenithal highlights come into play. You know, you're spraying, you know, dark underneath and light on top, pretty much from almost a straight down approach. I want my miniature to be highlighted from every angle, mainly for photography purposes, also for tabletop purposes. So if you see the front, back side, or whatever the miniature, it's pretty much highlighted the same. So hopefully it looks halfway decent. I'm using stronger highlights on these miniatures as well, because I do intend on writing my own set of rules for my miniature range, which these repeating crossbowmen are part of. So hopefully they'll photograph well in the book when that time comes. So there you go. Robes are pretty much done. Let's go right ahead and move on and do some leather. We're going to be using GW's Tuscarora fur. And again, you don't have to use the same colors that I'm using. You can pick your palette. And I'm just showing you my technique and the colors that I've used. And again, you can insert colors here. I always lay my paints out in the order in which I'm going to paint them, so I don't even have to think about it when I pick up the next color. So I often have groups of 3 paint pots showing me what my color palette's going to be and which color I'm going to choose next. Obviously, as I've gotten older, I'm beginning to write down my paint plans as well, because well, let's face it, my memory is not what it used to be. Okay, so now we're going to be doing some flat red. We're going to be painting some of the trim work. And if you noticed, I only used one color for the leather work, and it was again a pretty high highlight. That'll be washed down. The same thing for the red. I'm just going back in and touching it up, getting rid of any of those coffee stains that the Agrex Earthshade may have left. You can always go back in and add a highlight in here, either mix a little bit of orange or even a lighter brown, depending on, heck, even white, depending on the type of highlight that you want to make for your red. In this case, I want the tunic and the skin to stand out the most, so I'm keeping the red clean but pretty generic. So we're going to be using khaki now, and in this instance we're going to be working on the crossbow, painting crossbow, and the colors that I chose for the crossbow are more like a natural wood. I didn't want to show that they put a lot of effort into either painting it or staining it or anything along those lines, because essentially villagers would have mass produced these repeating crossbows. They would have used them for home defense or civil defense for the town walls or something of that nature. They were pretty easy to build and assemble. Most of it was all wood. There were a few metal components here or there, but they kept it as cheap as possible for people to be able to use. It was a pretty easy weapon of war to master. There was a little pump action that allowed you to shoot a bolt and then reload the crossbow and then shoot it again in pretty much all one fluid motion. The range was pretty poor, but at close range they were pretty effective, and they were really shooting more like almost like blowgun darts than crossbow bolts. The bolts weren't that big, but again, pretty neat and effective weapon. It's amazing how old this weapon essentially is. Whoops. Sometimes you just drop miniatures. So this is an instance where I'm mixing. I'm essentially doing about a 50-50 mix, maybe 70-30. And I'm just kind of going in, and as you can see, I'm using the edge of my brush to do a little edge highlight. And I'm just kind of hitting some of the major areas just to brighten up that crossbow. And give it a little bit more life than just one color. The nice thing is, with all these different shades of browns, they do kind of blend nicely in together, but it also gives the miniature a little bit of a pop as well. Now here comes the really big long step. Runefang steel. Okay, I was just kidding. There's really only two places on the miniature that have metal. In this instance, there's a little guard on the edge of the repeating crossbow, and he's got some hairpins. You can paint bronze or silver, whatever you want. I want silver. And then at this stage, I'm going to give the miniature a nice wash again, just to tone down all those highlights, just kind of blend it in. And as I said before, you can do one wash and just do all your highlights and wash it down if you want. But if you've already watched the first video, and again, I'd recommend it because that's step one of getting the model to the base coat colors and then a wash. And this step two is kind of showing you how I'm finishing it. But you can see at the end when they're all grouped together that this wash really does add a lot to the miniature, blending all the colors together, but also creating those contrasts. And then we're going to base the miniature with German camo black. I use a pretty old brush for my basing. You just got to be careful applying the paint, making sure that you're not, glopping it all over your miniature. People base miniatures at different times. Some people do it in the beginning, which is not a bad idea. Obviously, I don't have any of those painting sticks or handles that I work with. I'm kind of old school in that regard. I'm a little too stubborn to go out and buy them. I've tried blue tack in the past. Sometimes the miniatures fall off, sometimes they don't. So I stick with the old tried and true. And here you go. Here's a set of the 5 miniatures that you get when you buy a pack. And you can see how it really tones down those highlights. And here's a nice little unit of them. And I really appreciate you guys watching this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, post in the comments below what else you'd like to see, not only from the Watchful I Studio miniature ranges, but anything else that you may be interested in seeing down the line. I have a garage full of toy soldiers for many different game systems, and I want to do more paint tutorials, and I want to cater those towards what you guys are interested in seeing, whether it's working on a particular color, speed painting an army, working on a particular unit, or any even techniques. So again, thanks for watching. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.